In the past, I have made a small series of videos out of the fan game ideas submitted to me on an old survey. Said survey was created a few years ago. Recently, I remade it and read the new results in an equally new video, which I recommend checking out after this one. This survey had more ideas than before, and with explicit permission to use many of those submitted ideas. Of course, with over 1,000 responses, 500 to 600 of which have written ideas, it's a bit hard to go through everything. So here are 3 new fan dream game ideas. Let's start off with ImperialLegate's Detroit game. Descendants/remnants of a pre-war military have developed their own state. They're a military authoritarian government that claims legitimacy through continuing the pre-war martial law. They hold the center of the map and half of the game's main city, using ruthless tactics to maintain order. There are corrupt officers who take what they want from people that have no power to stop them. They would be the game's main power army using faction, as well as soldiers in fatigues and standardized equipment passed down since the apocalypse. Service rifles, laser weapons, big guns, with a few vertibirds and a fleet of ground vehicles. There's also an alliance of settlements on the outer edge of the map. Think of it as a mix of Minutemen and early NCR. They're actively forming a united government, and the protagonists can play an important role in deciding what kind of government they make. Moving on, there's an army of robots and/or cyborgs being controlled by a rogue Zax computer, or potentially a Zax computer being given orders by an unknown entity. The player could start off as a merc for the AI before choosing to side with it. It plans to turn all the Wastelanders into cyborgs and/or robots, which would allow them to thrive in the Wasteland. The writer claims it's like the Master, but less evil and more sensible. And finally, the new state. A group of ghouls, mutant humans, and normal humans who originally descended from prisoners of war camps and detention centers designed to host undesirables or suspected communists. They give aid to Wastelanders and help those suffering from radiation, but they often hang merchants or those they find with heavy amounts of local currency. And behind their front lines, they have a gulag-like work camps used to farm, mine, and scavenge, housed by those descended from pre-war wealth, ghouls who were soldiers, influential pre-war people, raiders, enemy faction members, and those who don't fully agree with their philosophy. The resources to supply their army and settlements come from these camps. They would have a faux People's Congress, which in effect did whatever the War Council, led by a qualified Chinese general, wanted them to do. They would be just as bad as the military remnants, but hide their bad side to those in the wasteland. Moving on to gameplay. Gun system akin to Fallout 4, but the ammo changing mechanic from New Vegas Gunrunners. Vehicles akin to the Frontier mod, but with less versatility. Most quests would have 2 to 3 outcomes based off a choice, and large quests would have 4 to 6 depending on the intention of the quest. The power armor system from 4 and 76, but a bit more refined so it's not so mech-like. Ability to gain mutations, cybernetic implants, and irreversible changes to your character with different treatment depending on the change. A large radiant encounter system, partly to discourage fast traveling, and finally an optional co-op system. There's definitely a lot of moving parts to the plot idea. Many elements are well thought out, with some amount of moral ambiguity in certain factions. I think most people would be drawn towards the unifying cities in the outer regions of the map, myself included, largely because they're not super extreme and offer a lot of customization. Next, Brilly Bobs San Francisco game. You play as a high plains drifter that has wandered their way into San Francisco, stumbling upon a shootout between the NCR and a terrorist group called the Free West. Hit by a stray bullet and beaten by a high-ranked NCR soldier, you fall unconscious from the blood loss and awake in a destroyed building being attended to by a young woman, until finding real medical attention. You explore all there is to explore in San Francisco and find out what's happening. A basic premise. The NCR has become a corrupt police state fighting the terrorist/freedom fighter group, the New West. Or the Free West. I'm not sure if this is a new group or the same. I'm assuming same, and the name change is an oversight. Anyway, the game would be gritty in tone, but with comedic moments through characters, interactable raider factions, so there's more depth to the world. The NCR would also be presented as a needed evil and not just evil for the sake of it. And of course, it's up to the player to decide who to hand the San Francisco waste to. As for gameplay, they mostly just say that they would like a refined Fallout 4 system with more depth, especially for melee, because they felt that Bethesda has always had underwhelming melee. Prior, they mentioned that the system would be a mix of 3/New Vegas and 4 together, as is a pretty standard results in these surveys. So I do like freedom fighter or rebellion stories, and wouldn't mind seeing something like this being built. We sort of see snippets of that around in the franchise, but never full-throttle locals standing up against an established power over them. Well, except Aditum, but that's a side quest in Fallout 1. Being said, if you want moral ambiguity, you have to show shades of both light and dark for the two main factions. Also, I noticed there was no mention of the Shi from Fallout 2 in this. They're a major power down in San Francisco's Chinatown. They probably would have some level of involvement, if only to assure a cooperative future neighbor. Here's an Arizona game with no credited writer. The writer states that the NCR occupying Arizona is their specific dream game, as it's the state where the Desert Rangers came from, which could make them rather important after the Legion falls apart and splits into a series of different tribes under different warlords, such as those under Legate Lanius or Lucius. The region would be like the Mojave with a growing but stretched NCR presence, and the area is called something like the Arizona Military Administration. There would be a third wildcard faction, but the writer has no idea what to do for that. In addition, an option to not side with any faction. Gameplay-wise, the writer states it would just be a mix of New Vegas and 4 together, as is the common trend. Noting the hardcore mode in New Vegas, the combat of Fallout 4, the enemy balance of New Vegas, and reliable builds with skills and perks for fun ways to play. So essentially, this idea is the second most literal meaning you could probably have with New Vegas 2. In that, it continues the story from New Vegas just outside of New Vegas itself. It isn't bad, but it does feel like really well-trekked territory. I suppose it depends on what is done with the third faction. You could create and bring a faction over from New Mexico, maybe. That or follow an independence type thing where the locals stand up for themselves. Obviously, it's going to be a little bit different without House or Yes Man, but it's hard to think of how to really make this idea stand up on its own and not just ride the success of its predecessor. But for now, that was 3 dream game ideas from the latest survey. More will come in the future, and if you haven't, check out the results of said survey. And a special thanks to my channel members, especially my members, TwiceOver members, like that crazy game developer and Danny McPhee. If you'd like to support me and join as well, I'd be more than happy. Otherwise, like, share, subscribe, all that typical YouTube stuff. Thank you. Have a good one.